The fiscal imbalance will have to come down the road, and this is the only way South Africa will eventually try to get out of the hole.
Luis, the Philippines and Indonesia delivering surprise rate cuts a little bit earlier on as well. Will other people look at what has been done there and think, you know what, actually there is more room to cut, and there is the potential to deliver further rate cuts? Are other central banks going to take note of what those countries did today?
Look, I think this is a very important note, right? I mean, here we are in a stance where lifting sentiment, at least up until last week, was becoming kind of universal, very positive vaccine news. But we know there are massive challenges going into 2021. And in the meantime, what we have the example coming from the States. What we have is the challenge of, further restrictions to mobility, the same restrictions we are living now in the UK and the rest of Europe. And it's a tug of war. And in this tug of war, the longer we stay here, and I do believe that more tempted central banks will be in emerging markets to cut rates further. So I still believe that we are going to see, further cuts in policy, further easing policy rates, especially in those spaces where we haven't seen an acceleration of the dovish stance so far. It's probably the case of Russia. It could be the case of other economies in Asia. So we do think that this is still at least first quarter and second quarter movie in 2021.
There appears to be some kind of consensus, though, that emerging markets is the place to be. They've handled the virus better. To your point, there's room to cut rates. There's also fiscal policy that's still, working in tandem in a way that it's not in the developed markets in the same way. I mean, at what point is it justified versus we're just going to be, it's too consensus? You just can't do it.
Well, I mean, I object to the statement that he handled the virus better. He didn't handle the virus better. Look at the curves, in Brazil, look at the curves in Latin America, and even Central Europe, which is now pretty much struggling quite a lot. Well, I do think that emerging markets as an asset class, and given the positive real yields we had in this asset class, indirectly, they are benefiting from massive, very aggressive policy action coming from the core markets, coming from the Fed, coming from the ECB, and the negative real rates we now have at the core. So this is obviously pushing international capital into EM, and we will probably continue to see a little bit of that going into the next year.
But is that real yield advantage starting to fade?
It will fade at a certain point if I am right in my prediction that we will probably continue to see, policy rate cuts. I mean, not necessarily ultra aggressive. I'm on the positive side in terms of vaccine prospects and how vaccine can propel the economy in the second half of the next year. But yes, I think that if this is done aggressively, at a certain point, it becomes detrimental to currencies. And that's when EMFX stops performing.
All right, Luis, thanks very much. Really good to talk to you. Luis Costa of Citigroup Global Markets joining us there. Here in the U.S., what we've seen as we're a little confused about where we're going in terms of the real economy now versus where we're going to be in a few months is investment-grade corporate debt and even high-yield debt is still a killer investment for certain individuals. You're seeing a lot of companies come back into the bond market, especially in investment-grade here today. Carnival also going back to the high-yield bond market, this time without ships as collateral. There has been that borrowing boom, and yet we're seeing iconic companies that are not earning enough to cover their interest expenses. So earlier today, Bloomberg's Michael McKee asked Cleveland Fed President Loretta Mester if we have a credit problem.
Losses and credit losses have not shown up at the banks as much as they might have. And so that's a positive in this economy, is that we don't see the kinds of things that we might have expected to see given the shock and the deep shock the pandemic was.
Well, joining us now is Jason Thomas, Carlyle Group Global Head of Research, with a new report out just on this very topic, talking about the credit issues globally and in the U.S. Hey, Jason, is Loretta Mester right? I mean, do we have a credit issue, or are we just going to keep coasting like this?
Well, I think if we think back to the spring, we've never seen the Fed or other advanced economy central bank respond to a negative shock with that speed or that much force. Within 2 weeks, after a pandemic had been declared, the Fed had cut rates to zero, started purchasing Treasury securities at a previously unimaginable clip, and it also pledged effectively to backstop the corporate credit market. So as a result of those actions, businesses, with few exceptions, could borrow whatever amount of liquidity they needed to cover short-term operating losses. So the core contention of the Carlyle report is that these Fed actions didn't really prevent or eliminate defaults so much as flatten the curve. Yes, the first wave of defaults is going to be 40% smaller than one might have expected in March or April, but in many cases, these defaults have simply been pushed further into the future.
In terms of the impact on the economy, what will that be? We are going to take longer to get through the process of creative destruction. We are going to have zombie companies hanging around for that much longer before they ultimately end up defaulting. And I'm curious as to your sense of what that means in the phase kind of after we get the vaccine, after we've the post-COVID phase. What does the economy and the global economy look like?
Well, in that initial phase, in terms of the policymakers' response, they really wanted to err on the side of doing too much. The normal moral hazard concerns that would have kept the Fed from intervening on that scale were not present here, because they decided that no business could reasonably have been expected to prepare for a pandemic. But over the next 2 years, the calculus is going to change. Policymakers are going to start to worry about zombies, because zombies, by having excess capacity, introduce disinflationary pressure. It makes it harder to hit your inflation targets. It also means that the more productive firms can't raise prices, and it also depresses the economy-wide return on capital. So I think what we're going to see in 2021 with the vaccine is this shift in policymakers' focus and becoming more sensitized to doing too much. They're going to end the facilities. Rates are going to remain low. Make no mistake about that. I think QE is going to continue, but these emergency liquidity facilities, the backstops, they're going away.
So, Jason, who's going to be at risk for that? I mean, is that going to be the credit investor, and will they not have the kind of recovery rate that we might expect? Or is it going to be the equity investor that if these companies keep going back to the market, issuing equity, having a big stockpile of cash, is it the equity investor more on the hook?
Well, I think what's so fascinating about the market today is that there's a little bit of everything. You know, we always think about credit markets in terms of cycles, but this market defies cyclical characterization. You do have businesses that are in distress. That's largely retail. It's largely energy. Those are industries that were facing structural headwinds entering the crisis. You have those businesses that are probably going to benefit from pent-up demand in experiences spending, travel, tourism, live events. So, you know, investing in them, and from the creditor's perspective, could be a good bet. You know, they're going to grow rapidly, perhaps at the end of 2021. But I do want to also mention there's fast-growing businesses today in technology, business services, healthcare. In those capital structures, you have the largest equity contributions we've ever seen. So on average in 2020, equity contributions averaging 50% of enterprise value. So, you know, when the market value of the assets of those businesses could fall in half, and the creditors are still fully covered in terms of the face value of their liabilities. So I think answering that question first just requires appreciation for how for the dispersion in the market and how different these individual situations happen to be.
Jason, the Fed, other central banks have created an environment where credit has been a no-brainer. With the Fed at your back, you have been able to make serious money in this space. As the Fed departs the field, as other central banks depart the field, as you suggest they will, what does that mean for credit investors that have gone down the credit scale because they're searching for yield, because they're searching for a greater pickup, and because they know that these central banks have got their back? How quickly does this reverse, and what does it look like?
Well, I think it looks like just increased dispersion. We see dramatic dispersion in real economic outcomes in terms of performance across industries. But because of that central bank backstop, we haven't seen a commensurate dispersion in pricing. Zombie businesses can issue liabilities at roughly comparable spreads to businesses that are you know, doing very well on a going concern basis. So I think the first step in this process, once the market operates without a net and central banks pull back those liquidity facilities, is just much more dramatic cross-sectional dispersion in spreads, in pricing. And I think that that's going to be a market where it's going to be very attractive for those investors that are able to identify those credits that perhaps today are in some bit of trouble because of social distancing and social
Hello guys, today we have commodities. We have here the oil, here we have the platinum, and here we have the gas. Here we have the euro Swiss franc from the last week. As you can see, it's still in this range. He's sideways. As you can see here, this moves sideways. Okay, let's see about these three. The oil here on this level has the resistance level. Here if we will touch again the 42 level, 42.85, we will place another sell. So far we have a sell here on 41.20. On the platinum, as you can see here, was the highest, and here is the support level. That's why we place a sell order here. On the natural gas, here, the gas clearly is in a downtrend, as you can see from here. Here in this area, when it was sideways, we place a sell order. The gas already is in the resistance level here, and here the downtrend starts. Let's see what happens next. Stay with us.
That does it for me and Guy here in New York and London. Coming up, you got Balance of Power with David Weston on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
Okay, if here, if the platinum touches again this level, we will place another sell order. And the oil the same. If the oil goes here again, we will place another sell order.
At least not as of now, which means that the incoming administration can't fully get up and running despite pressing issues such as the pandemic.
I have no budget. I can't do any of this until I'm sworn in, or I can convince the president now to do things that should be being done already. I mean, there's hardly been a meeting that's taken place in the White House about any of this.
We welcome now someone who has run a presidential transition team. Before Valerie Jarrett served for 8 years as senior advisor to President Obama, she was co-chair of the Obama transition team in 2008, all of which she wrote about in her book, Finding My Voice: When the Perfect Plan Crumbles, the Adventure Begins. So, Ms. Jarrett, thank you so much for being back with us. Really appreciate it. As I say, you've actually run one of these. You know what a gargantuan task this is. How much more difficult is it because we've been delayed at least some time getting it started?
Needlessly more. Now, I will say, obviously, the president-elect's team has been assembled. They have been working diligently on policies and generating staffing recommendations for the president-elect, both in the White House. He's already named his chief of staff, and also in the cabinet. They're going through a vetting process for that. But in the midst of a pandemic, with millions of Americans losing their jobs, it is more important than ever that the agencies be available to the transition team. And I always say that one of the things that surprised me with President Obama's transition was the unbelievable degree of cooperation we received from President Bush. Now, we may not have agreed with him on policies, but what President Bush believed is in the smooth and orderly transition of power. And when President Obama was leaving office, we did the exact same thing at his direction for President Trump, because this isn't about politics. It's about keeping our country safe, keeping it healthy. And if you think about, there's been a focus on the presidential daily briefing that the president-elect isn't getting, but we have 16 different intelligence agencies, and the team decisions and bring her life experiences to bear on that. And that's what he says he wants, not just as a vice president, but throughout the administration. Already the transition team is majority women, it's near majority people of color. And so he's off to a very good start. And I think that you can tell a lot about a person by who they surround themselves with. And since I know so many of the folks on the team well, I am really impressed. I know that he will hit the ground running, but to return again, David, it would be so much easier if we had the full cooperation of the Trump administration. When I say we, I mean our country, because this is really about putting country first.
Every new president comes in with a very full inbox, I think it's fair to say. But this president in particular, the President Biden, when he takes office, is going to have the coronavirus. He's got economic issues. He has a lot of issues domestically before he gets to international issues. At the same time, there are pressing issues that you really took some ownership of when you were in the White House. Things like racial justice, things like how we're dealing with working mothers who are particularly hard hit right now. For example, here in New York City, as their kids are not in school, the working mothers have a very difficult time. What can the White House, what can the administration do without the cooperation of the Congress in those areas?
Well, tone starts at the top, and I think he's already signaled that his first priority is to get.
Seems like we have some problems with the mic. I hope we solve them.
We'll be making recommendations to him about steps to hold, not only to contain it, but once we have the vaccine, to make sure that people actually get vaccinated in a fair and equitable way. He has always been an advocate for working families, and I think the pandemic has laid bare challenges that have existed for a long time. Paid people pay, paid leave, paid sick days. We know that women are suffering disproportionately in this pandemic, and that's why we said to build America back, we have to build it back better. So what are the levers that we turn as we craft the recovery package? And look, when he came in 2009, President Obama asked his then vice president to be responsible for that $800 billion Recovery Act and make sure that the resources were going where they were needed most. And so he is well prepared to do this again. And in fact, his chief of staff that he just selected was the same person who was his chief of staff at that time. So he has got to, he said the only way we're going to grow our economy is to get our arms around this pandemic. And I will say, sitting here watching it spiral out of control with no leadership coming from the White House day after day after day, with aging 250,000 people dead. Just think about those Thanksgiving tables where they're going to be
Okay,
sitting and
I will explain again.
And so again, that's why
Here
this is a
we have the platinum, here we have the oil, here we have the gas.
and to the point you raised in terms of the
Here
racial, even the criminal justice
here we have the euro Swiss franc from the last week.
one thing I know about
This
President
is
Biden is
in
that
the sideways
his policy shot
movement.
looking
As you can see
all the
here,
issues that he articulated in his campaign.
Lehman
He will
broke
make sure
the
is
resistance level
rejoined
here.
the Paris Climate Accord. He will make sure that we are being responsible in our relationships with our allies
Okay.
around the world. He will take care of the grievances.
Here
And
we have the
more
oil.
so than
The
that, he will
oil is
rejoin
in the
global
resistance zone.
these are all steps that
As
he
you
can
can
take
see
on his
here
own without Congress, but he also has made it very
is
clear
the
that he
level of
intends
resistance,
to work with members of Congress. And I think President
43
Biden,
level here.
as a member of the Senate for so
It's in a
long,
downtrend,
has
but
deep
we will see.
strong relationships, and that's part of what
Here we
makes him
have the
so great
platinum.
in this
The
transition
platinum
period is that the people who know better
here
are not putting pressure on the
has
president.
the
The people who
resistance
sit on
level,
the intelligence committees right now know the information
and
they have access to.
that's why we
They should want
place an
President
order,
Biden to
a
have
sell
that
order here.
relationship.
The natural gas here,
Most
the gas
appreciated. Then Vice President, now President-elect
is
Biden,
also
who's
in a
doing an
downtrend,
incredible
as
job.
you
When
can
you
see
look at him, how do you
here.
think that he might govern in a way that's similar to
Here.
President Obama, albeit at a different time when issues are different? And how do you think he might be different from President Obama?
And that's why
Well, I
we
think we
place
do
here
share
a
very
sell
much the
order.
same values, the same sense that we have to look out for all of
Okay,
America, not just some
stay
of
with us
America. When
and
President Biden campaigned, he said, I'm the
enjoy.
unbiased Democrat, that I will govern for all of America. That reminded me of President Obama when he said, there aren't red states and blue states, there are the United States of America. That sense of we should bring ourselves together and heal. And I think that you're right, he is taking office at a time where our country is particularly fractured and polarized. And I think he has just the right tone and message and policies that will help bring us together and heal. And that is a deep wound that has to be healed. He received more votes than ever, any other president ever. Yeah, he has more popular votes by 5 million and counting than President Trump. But a big chunk of our country did vote for President Trump. And I think that because of his life experiences, because he's had all these years working on both sides of the aisle on the Hill, I think he does bring those relationships, which will be important to heal the country. But I also think he has a real gift for reaching out across the country and making people feel heard, making people feel valued, and knowing that he's on their side. And I will say this about both presidents. They woke up every morning, and I know this is what when I say both presidents, I mean President Obama and President-elect Biden will wake up every single morning thinking about the American people, not himself, not what's happening to him in the news, not criticism directed his way, but how to make our lives better.
So that's reaching out across America. What about reaching across the aisle? You referred to that earlier. At the same time, we all remember that when the Affordable Care Act came up, as I recall, there was not one single Republican vote for that. What are the prospects really for President Biden to reach across the aisle to Mitch McConnell, who has not been an easy customer from what we can see at least, and getting some things done?
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. We tried mightily, and President-elect Biden was instrumental in this effort to reach across the aisle during the 8 years of President Obama's administration. And the Republicans made the political calculus that it was better to just say no, no matter what our overtures were. And I think that we're at a different time now. And I think the American people are sick and tired of this deadlock in Washington, this acrimony. And even though we see a lot of toxicity in social media, I think most people in America are good and decent people, and they want to see their government working. And the fact that they voted in record numbers in this election, David, compared to the 100 million who did not vote in 2016. What I hope is that that activism continues and that they put pressure on their elected representatives to say, well, don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. Get in there and work with the Biden administration. And I can certainly tell you that President-elect Biden will do his part. And he does have good relationships with them. And the posturing you might see on television probably doesn't show the respect that they have. There was a video circulating a while ago about Lindsey Graham, who spoke about Joe Biden soon after the death of Beau. And Lindsey Graham was moved to tears. And he said, there is no finer man than Joe Biden. And I hope he holds that thought when Joe Biden is sworn in as president, and will work with him because that's what I think our country deserves. Yeah. And I hope the American people demand it.
Indeed. I want to wrap this up by coming back to where we were, because there's news that's been breaking even as we've been talking. The CDC now is recommending social distancing, masks, and against travel for Thanksgiving. So the CDC is saying that given what you were talking about this surge in COVID, there can only be one president at a time. Would it be best for the country and perhaps for President-elect Biden if, in fact, we did have more leadership out of the White House right now on the COVID-19 issue?
Well, of course. We needed that leadership since day one, David. Look, I just canceled my plans. My mom is 92. It would be very important to me to be able to spend Thanksgiving with her. But I'm listening to the science. And so I would rather not see her this Thanksgiving and get to see her next Thanksgiving. And so from day one, President Trump has tried to pretend that we were not in a crisis. And we gave him a roadmap, speaking of the transition, of how to handle a pandemic. President Obama said back in 2014, we should expect a pandemic. We did a tabletop exercise for them saying, these are the steps that we think you need to take today in order to be prepared for it. And they basically tossed it in the garbage.
United States experienced the smallest economic contraction and the most rapid economic recovery of any major Western nation. We went down less and we went up more, which is quite a combination of facts. While healthy Americans have gone back to work and to school, we continue to spare no expense to protect the elderly and the vulnerable. According to some estimates, a national lockdown costs $50 billion a day and hundreds of thousands of jobs every single day. Ideally, we won't go to a lockdown. I will not go. This administration will not be going to a lockdown. Hopefully, the whatever happens in the future, who knows which administration it will be. I guess time will tell. But I can tell you this administration will not go to a lockdown. There won't be necessity. Lockdowns cost lives, and they cost a lot of problems. The cure cannot be, you got to remember, cannot be worse than the problem itself, and I've said it many times. And when you look at what happens during a lockdown, I just say it very loudly. It's horrible what happens with drugs, alcohol, depression, loss of jobs, business closures. It's a terrible thing. So this administration will not go, under any circumstances, will not go to a lockdown, but we'll be very vigilant, very careful. We understand the disease. It's a complicated disease, but we understand it very well.
SAS and Microsoft are joining forces to further shape the future of AI. Now you can run workloads that work for you. It's time to reimagine analytics in the cloud.
Kirsten, obviously this is an important job that Chris Krebs was doing. Are you worried at all for American security at this very moment, not having a director of cyber and infrastructure security?
Well, thanks, Emily. Thanks for being with you as always. The short answer is no, I'm not worried, and that's because of the work that Chris Krebs has done over the last 2 years. So this agency, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, just came into being in 2018, and Chris and his team spent 2 years ensuring the security of this election, as well as future elections, going to state and local governments, securing infrastructure across the nation. And because of that work, the team in place now is very much prepared to address handling government. We have continuity of operations in government. That's what good government does. And that's a testament to the leadership of CISA, to Chris Krebs, to his deputy, Matt Travis, and to the team. And so while it is unfortunate, it is an irresponsible act on the part of this president to have fired him, I'm not concerned about the security of the nation.
The president, of course, doing this via tweet, again, claiming election fraud, and that what Chris Krebs has said in the past about election security is, quote, highly inaccurate. Krebs actually responding on Twitter as well, saying, I never claimed there wasn't fraud in the election because that's not CISA's job. It's a law enforcement matter. We did provide information on measures election officials used to prevent and detect dead voters, though. Don't buy it and think twice before sharing. What do you think this says at all about the integrity of the election?
I think based on what we've heard across multiple jurisdictions, we have 10,000 voting jurisdictions in this country. State and local officials from both parties have all come forward to validate the integrity of the election. And there's no reason to doubt all of those voices who were on the ground securing the integrity. And that was one of the key focus points. And it was an impressive election from the perspective of national security when you think of all of the threats that we know were and are coming at us. But there's no reason to believe anything other than all of the people that are on the ground, the government officials, state and local governments, jurisdictions who have all validated the integrity of this election.
Krebs had wide bipartisan support. As we head into the next administration, how do you think the Biden team should be looking at this, and what should they be doing to plan for their own transition?
It's a great question because cybersecurity is evolving so much. So I was working in the Senate in 2001 and worked on the legislation to create the Department of Homeland Security. So I've seen this growth and this evolution through this agency, through its awkward stages. And where we are now is we've gone through serious progress. The last 4 years, led by Chris and the work of CISA from an infrastructure perspective, we've made a lot of progress. And now we have to continue to look forward. And the priorities are the same. We have to look at how we build a safe and secure digital infrastructure. We have to examine how we can deter and prevent nation-state activity and threats against our infrastructure. And we have to work with businesses of all sizes to stay secure and combat cybercrime. So this administration that's coming, this Biden administration and the transition team, needs to be looking forward, needs to grow upon the successes of the past, and has to absolutely have a diverse workforce in its diversity of opinion, perspective, race, gender, culture. Cybersecurity is about building solutions and problem solving. And the best way we can do that to create innovative approaches for moving forward is to ensure we've got diversity of voices and represent the new and emerging voices that we're seeing in this space.
Krebs has been quite humorous about this situation on Twitter, saying he's now going to reintroduce himself to his family, watch sports, and ride bikes. I mean, do you think that Biden should consider rehiring him for his administration?
I think President-elect Biden has a lot of people around him who have worked in government in the past, who are from industry. And again, we want to make sure that as we look forward, we're going to bring in a workforce that's going to take the successes that have been built, take the successes that Chris has achieved, and build upon them. I certainly expect President-elect Biden to look at Chris, particularly during the transition, because that's how good government works. We work off of the successes of the past to build forward.
At this moment, what do you think the biggest cyber threats are that Biden's team needs to be worried about? Obviously, the relationship with China is, incredibly frosty, and tensions have escalated. Similar situation with some other countries out there, and certainly, the Trump administration hasn't done the best job at maintaining our relationships with traditional U.S. allies. What do you think should be priority number one on the cyber front for Biden's team?
Well, it's a two-pronged priority. Number one, I think we absolutely have to look at how we're working internationally. We have to get rid of the America first, America only approach, and really reach out and repair the international relationships that have been hurt over the last 4 years. And when we look at cybersecurity, we can't do this on our own. We have to do it in collaboration with like-minded economic nations. We have to build a coalition of the willing to build a safe and secure digital infrastructure. So there's the international piece. And on the domestic side, right now, the current threat that's much more serious than I think we continue to acknowledge is ransomware, because ransomware is affecting businesses of all sizes. And when we look at the interdependencies of global supply chains, small businesses are the most vulnerable. And so we have to continue the work underway to really help small businesses be more secure so that these global value chains can do better work. And with the Cyber Readiness Institute, we've worked closely with Chris and his team on helping small businesses. And I hope that work continues, certainly in the coming years.
My work does not try to be political in a direct sense. What it does try to do.
Does what's happening right now with the President of the United States' health, does that slow down or speed up fiscal talks?
Well, I think what happens in economy actually speeds up the fiscal talk. I mean, I don't think the president's health would actually be a game changer in the fiscal stimulus discussion. But what we saw over the weekend, last Friday, is that the jobs market remains very mixed. And in particular, there is a trending high in the permanent layoffs. That is a bit of a concern. And also we saw that an increasing number of people are dropping out of the labor market, as you can see from the fall in the labor participation rate. I think this is more of a concern that there's a need for further fiscal stimulus. And the more you leave it longer, the more long-lasting that economic scarring is going to be. And we already see that in that rise in the permanent layoffs.
Janet, what do you make of Mohamed El-Erian's point, the human counterparty risk? We see the frailty of the First Lady and the President of the United States of America. And it could cast an even larger cloud over consumption and demand. And therein lies the point. Consumer confidence, consumer spending, and cyclicals could come under pressure as we see perhaps a retrenchment in human behavior.
Yeah, I think that's certainly the uncertainty that market doesn't like. I mean, it is still unclear how is his health condition, but so far it does suggest that he's all right, judging from his press conference and he's showing up. And so I think that will be uncertainty in the markets. And I think, as we head into the election 1 month, a lot of things can happen. And I think markets are actually pricing in some sort of high uncertainty, as you can see from the VIX index. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's a bit of a correction or volatility as we move towards the end of the month. And even on the election day, even if we get the results, it may actually not be as apparent as to who will have won. So markets could continue to be uncertain until we finally get more clarity. So yeah, we have to fasten our seatbelts.
Certainly button our seatbelts. Janet, your notes, you talk about the fact that you don't think the presidential debate really moved the dial. This week, of course, we're going to have the vice presidential debate on October 7th. Do you think this takes on more significance for you, given the President of the United States' health?
Oh, I think there will be definitely more challenge on President Health's front because, I mean, it is unclear whether the COVID-19 illness will weaken him at some point, like for his health. So that's a clear debating point. And also, I think a lot of focus will be on how he has handled the pandemic. I mean, he hasn't been taking it too seriously. So he caught the COVID. I mean, he accused Joe Biden of wearing a face mask, which is actually the right thing to do. And, he actually hasn't followed the guidelines that he has been giving out with regards to self-isolation. So I think he will be definitely grilled on that, and the debate would definitely focus on how he handled the pandemic and the recent worsening in the U.S. labor market.
My work does not try to be political in a direct sense. What it does try to...
What do we know?
Yeah, Jules, so this is reporting from Axios, quoting sources from within the Trump administration saying that, yes, on one front, they are planning very tough additional actions on China in the weeks ahead, the remaining 10 weeks before that transition on January the 20th. And part of the reason, you touched on this, part of the reason, as you say, is to box in Biden and to make it more difficult, essentially, for a Biden administration to really reset relations with Beijing. The other component of this is to try and cement Trump's legacy as being tough on trade. So what are the details, according to Axios? Well, they are apparently lining up additional sanctions and perhaps trade restrictions on not just Chinese companies, but Chinese government entities and also Chinese government officials, potentially. And they would link this, we're hearing from Axios, to human rights abuses, alleged human rights abuses in Xinjiang and Hong Kong by the Chinese regime, and also threats to U.S. national security. And of course, it comes, this reporting, after the move last week by the U.S. administration to ban investment in 31 Chinese companies that they say, that the Pentagon says, have links to the Chinese military.
My work does not try to be political in a direct sense. What it does try to...
What was this kind of Twitter drama all about?
Well, Heidi, it seems like over the past week that at some point President Trump will look for a way to both accept defeat and claim victory in the same breath. And we thought we had that today, to say, oh, okay, well, he won, but only because the election was rigged. He may not have quite meant it that way, and within an hour he recanted. But that's, I think, still the model of ultimately what he'll come out and say. He has told certain confidence, like Geraldo Rivera, that he wants to see, for example, the results of the recount in Georgia. Now, that recount is going very quickly, and from what we've heard, there's more likely to change 12 votes than 12,000 votes. I mean, they're really not finding anything. It's going very well. So one of the next things for Trump will be the certification state by state of the election, and those dates are coming up in the next couple of weeks. So really, as we get toward Thanksgiving, more and more states will actually say that the election results were right. And as you know, the Trump campaign has filed numerous lawsuits. Those have pretty much all been thrown out for lack of evidence, and it doesn't seem like there's much they can do. But I think you'll see them continue to file those suits.
we will add another sell order here on the oil.
Before the election, but we did hear today from three members of Biden's coronavirus team, Atul Gawande, Vivek Murthy, and Michael Osterham, and they basically said that national lockdowns are too blunt an instrument, sort of like monetary policy. You know, it's just too blunt to really get at this municipality or this state that's having particular problems. So they favor more locally driven policy. And I think people hearing that might be somewhat relieved if they have kind of bought into the idea that Biden would favor a national lockdown.
Here.
We also heard that Biden's team
And
will meet this
this
week
will go
with
down.
pharmaceutical companies, and they're really focused on
We will close
the vaccines that
this
are coming.
order
And
here.
as Ron Klain, the incoming chief of staff, said, not just the vaccines, but getting the vaccines to the people. He said, you know, just a vaccine by itself is nothing, but once it's jabbed in your arm, it's something. So that's what they're focused on. And at the same time, they're sort of aware that lockdowns and hard measures really take a toll on people, on small businesses, on workers, and that's something that they seem to be quite aware of. So it's a real balancing act, as it has been for the Trump administration, but it seems like that's the kind of advice that President-elect Joe Biden is going to be getting over the next few weeks.
Ryan, what is beneath the radar that we're not seeing in the media right now?
So I don't think that we're going to begin the transition until December. And there's three key dates that I'm watching for. One is December 8th, which is the so-called safe harbor deadline, when the states need to put their slate of electors together. Presumably on December 8th, when all of the states say, okay, here's our electors and it's Joe Biden, then the head of the General Services Administration could feel the pressure to recognize Joe Biden as the president-elect.
Okay, Ryan, I don't mean to interrupt, but the zeitgeist is the woman at the GSA can only act if the White House tells her to act. Is that true?
That's not really true, but, I mean, this is the Trump administration, so I think that she is aware that if she sends that letter, Trump will just fire her or something like to that effect. So, you know, I don't know, I can't read her motivation, but there's nothing really preventing her from doing it. This is her decision. But it's the Trump administration, and he's often made clear in that sort of, will no one rid me of this troublesome priest kind of way, what he wants you to do, and very publicly, and then you try to do it. So that she's clearly doing what she thinks he wants her to do.
But Ryan, he's no longer president in a couple of months. So, could she just not get hired back?
Yeah, I don't think her job's going to last past January anyway. She's also the person who approved the Trump Hotel, which is not a thing that's popular with Democrats. The key point here is I think whether the Democrats try to bring her before
Okay, I think that's it for today. We will see you next week when we'll do another live trading. I hope you enjoy today analyst and what the trades you see here. See you next time. Bye bye.
To gain votes through the recount. I think that they're aware that that's not really going to happen. What the strategy is to continue sowing doubt in the results enough that Republican lawmakers in some of those states will feel like, gosh, no one knows who won. We need to step in and appoint the electors ourselves. That strategy is also massively flawed from a legal, a constitutional, and an ethical standpoint. But it's also not going to work. Like, that's not going to happen either. But the point is as long as he has some belief that there's some lever he can pull, the president is not going to give in on this. So we're going to just play this out. I think that has consequences for, as you noted, the coronavirus vaccine